Noob Review.
My name's Tommy Jacob. I'm the creative director on Ghost Recon Future Soldiers multiplayer.
So, in terms of being the creative director, what kind of influence have you had on the multiplayer package?
For me, the beauty of being a creative director is how you get to interact and involve a team. So my goal was more about the structure and how we were going to do what we were going to do. I certainly had a vision about what I felt like were the strengths of the franchise. What we did when we started off was we wanted to identify how Future Soldier was going to be that next evolution for Ghost Recon. What were the key components that we wanted to build off of from previous successful Ghost Recon projects, and then what were we going to bring in that was new, and then what were we going to do that wasn't just Ghost Recon but something that we felt like was necessary. So there's a very specific reason I mentioned them in that order. For Ghost Recon, we wanted it to combat was key. It's a shooter, so we knew we wanted to go in there and make the navigating the character, moving around the space, and just shooting, just that raw element of gameplay, exciting and fun. We introduced from a new experience standpoint the intel loop. So the way that the players go about collecting intel, sharing it with their teammates, or countering the intel loop and hiding from the intel collecting devices, like being out of line of sight of the jammer, throwing EMPs to take out equipment, being out of line of sight of the UAV, throwing EMPs to take out equipment, and then using the jammer to create those kind of safe zones. And then last, but what ended up becoming, I guess, more of a primary focus was teamwork. So all of our game types are objective-based, and in doing that, we wanted to drive players to playing together. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's proximity-based. It doesn't mean that you and I have to be shoulder to shoulder in order to be effective. It just means that we're collaborating, we're coordinating. We have a whole coordination system that was built for that. The fact that, and we learned this from the development team that worked on the campaign out of Paris, brought a very interesting detail to our eyes, in that a lot of times you get people that are playing on servers that don't even necessarily speak the same language. In Europe, you could have people playing together that are speaking different languages. So we have this coordination system that is non-verbal. It's a non-verbal communication tool that allows you to show your fire teammates your intentions. I'm going to Alpha, I'm going to Bravo. Which objective are you heading to? Well, I'm padding to you. So those tools and those systems that we have are in support of this overall kind of global goal that we recognized, which was the most driving thing, which was the team. Getting players to see the value in not just their teammate as somebody that can also throw bullets, but somebody that, I want my guys near me so they can revive me. If I get stunned and somebody's in the middle of data mugging me, they're going to be able to come over and get me out of that. The focus on that became this primary goal that the whole team contributed to. So to answer your question, as creative director, helping the team identify the identity of the project, what components, there's 4 pillars that are necessary to support that, and then giving them ownership over those features to help us figure out how we can design, refine, and tune them so that they support that experience throughout.
Sure. So the game development split across 3 main studios. What kind of challenges did you have working with such a wide team?
The number one challenge was just the lack of overlap in time. You get into for us, we're 6 hours behind the Paris studio. So you come into work and you have essentially until noon or 1 o'clock to have all those critical conversations that are needed to ensure that both teams are on the same page on things. So that lack of overlap was probably the biggest challenge, and that all comes down to understanding where, once you know that, then you know that part of the day becomes the focus on all of my international communication needs to happen immediately. I come in the door at 8 o'clock in the morning. If I'm answering email, it's the ones from the guys that are in Paris, because those are the ones that have the least amount of time to respond to that. So the guys that are going to be here have another 5-6 hours of my time after those guys have left. So certainly the biggest challenge is just communicating with those time zone differences.
Sure. So it's been 5 years since we've had the Ghost Recon title on the main console. What have you seen coming out onto the market in the last 5 years, and how's that affected what you've developed with Advanced Future Soldier?
Sure, it's completely inspired us. We learned that people like to shoot. People like shooting guns in games. People like the military theme a lot. This is obviously something that Ghost Recon created, helped to be a part of from the very beginning of the military shooter. You can't really have a conversation about military shooters and the startup without talking about the Clancy line, Ghost Recon title. The beauty of that is that in setting goals for Future Soldier, we did recognize a void. We saw where there's such fantastic shooters out there that they've got great systems and great mechanics and great gameplay, but we felt like there was this lacking of that drive to get players to play together in these different dynamic ways, and that element of teamwork, that element of coordination. So in seeing that those titles come out and be as successful as they are, it still drove us to fill that void. We wanted to be different. We didn't want to come out and try and compete with those titles. It wasn't an interest of ours. They do their job great. Call of Duty does Call of Duty really, really well. Battlefield does Battlefield really, really well. We didn't want to be Call of Duty and Battlefield. We wanted to be Ghost Recon. So the beauty of that is in them doing what they did so well, it just helped us further define ourselves as something different. And we're very inspired by it. The guys in the shop play those games. When Battlefield came out, we were all as excited as anybody else to play Battlefield. Right? But in playing it, it just helped us in our own excitement of our own experience as well, to see that we are this unique and different thing, and we're really excited about the response that we've had from players that are dedicated to all those titles. The Gears players, the Battlefield players, the Call of Duty players, to come in and play our game and have an expectation, and then to see in some cases the expectation is met. They said, I read about this or I heard about this, and this is, you guys nailed that. Or to have them come in and expect Call of Duty, and then to see how it's been different, and then to embrace that, to love it for what it is, and to fill that gap. So that's playing all those games during that 5-year window has helped us really create that identity for what Future Soldier is and how it's different from everybody else.
How much interaction do you have with the people developing the single player? How do you make it feel like one cohesive experience rather than two disjointed ones?
It's constant. We have
Team 3 for real this time. If you can make your way to the camera, and Team 1 again. I know you're here.
So a lot of the obvious things are just from the beginning of the game when we're developing systems. Obviously, it's not campaign developing systems in Paris and multiplayer developing systems in North Carolina and in the States. A lot of these things were shared, resources were shared. We had engineers on our side working on systems that were maybe more campaign focused and vice versa. But you're creating one experience on one disc, so there needs to be familiarity as the players jumping back and forth between the two. So a lot of the systems that you'll use were built in one location, and then they're just used in both halves of the game. In terms of spaces, art, and content, there's a lot of shared assets. We had maps that were built for multiplayer. The maps themselves were designed and built in North Carolina, but some of the assets that are in there were pulled from the campaign, and vice versa. There are areas within the campaign where they pulled assets from the multiplayer maps and shared them. So thematically, the multiplayer maps follow the spaces that exist throughout the campaign, so we wanted to keep that experience in terms of where you played similar between the two. A lot of the systems are similar as well, but we also acknowledge that the player that comes into play campaign and co-op have different needs than what they play in multiplayer. We wanted the campaign to feel cinematic and to be beautiful and to have these types of experiences that may not necessarily translate to the pacing of multiplayer. In the multiplayer, the response that you need from multiplayer, for just camera reaction, camera movement, needs to be different to support that competitive gameplay. So we made changes where they needed to be different, but at every step, every turn, we tried to make sure that they were as close together as possible.
Okay, we've got to the point now in the real world where we've passed where the narrative was of Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, for example. So, looking at the world now as it is, are there a number of predictions that you made in GRAW and GRAW 2 that you think, that should have happened by now in terms of technology? We predicted it and it hasn't quite happened yet.
I can't think of any piece of technology necessarily that exists from GRAW 1 or GRAW 2 that we necessarily anticipated that it would be further along in development. I think for us the most exciting thing is to see how we've embraced what we know that the military is doing now, even though even just 2 years ago at E3 we showed the optical camo for the first time, and we got just reamed about how this is a science fiction game. They're using the Harry Potter cloak in a shooter game, and it doesn't make sense, it doesn't match up. But we know for a fact that the military is using these camera and LED projection systems to create these cloaking devices. It exists. It's just the only difference between what we have in the game and what's available in the real world is scale. It's a process of miniaturization. So we don't having that relationship with the military and knowing what their development is allows us access to this to see what the near future is going to be. And for Future Soldier, seeing that the weapons, some of them are prototype weapons, but they all function as real weapons do. The equipment in terms of how we collect intel and with the scouts for multiplayer and with all the ghosts in the campaign, how they hide from that with the camo. That's all stuff that we know it's coming. It's not something that a few years from now we'll be thinking, man, they really should have had that out by now. There was actually, I mentioned this earlier, there was one of the car companies, I believe, is demoing the technology now. They have one side of the car covered in digital cameras and the other side of the car is covered in the LEDs. So they have it parked in a location and it's completely masked. It's hidden from the environment because it's just projecting what it's seeing on the other side through onto these LEDs. It's completely masked out. It's really cool. But it's exciting to see that so tangible. It's right there. It's this thing that just 2 years ago we were getting ripped apart for being science fiction or sorcery. And now it's this thing that we know the military is using that they're going to be implementing on their Future Soldier program.
So in terms of the narrative, did you have a definite sort of stopping point of saying a future date where you say we can't set the story any further than that because then we're moving into science fiction?
I know that when we were looking at the story, we were always envisioning a near future. So it wasn't long ago in a galaxy far, far away, and it wasn't a future that was going to have laser guns and spaceships. But again, having those relationships and those tie-ins to the military, we know where their inspiration comes from. I think it was mentioned in here earlier about how the Predator movie was one of the things that inspired the military to start investigating optical camo. Those types of innovations happen all the time, and Hollywood is definitely something that the military look to drive that inspiration. We've seen that just from our own advisors, where they'll see Minority Report, a movie like that uses that, and they use that in Iron Man constantly, like Tony Stark's workshop in his relationship with Jarvis, the computer, and how he has the augmented reality interface. This is available now. There's augmented reality with your phone. You can have your phone up and move through space in some settings, and you can see where the nearest gas station is, and you'll see that little AR icon pop up and show you distance. All these things are things that may not be implemented exactly the way we have them in the game, but we know what the military's desires are for helping to better equip their soldiers, and we know how they're inspired by what video games and film do. So having that relationship gives us access to see what they've gravitated to and what they're actually working to implement. So.
Here concludes the first part of NewbReview.com's interview with Tommy Jacob, creative director for the multiplayer aspect of Ghost Recon Future Soldier. But don't worry, there's a whole nother part to come. Look out for it at NewbReview.com's YouTube channel.
Thank you for playing. Presented by
Noob Review.